part of societal and generational change.
Hello.
Hello. Excuse me.
Hi, Barry. My name's Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca. Good to see you.
You too. Very excited to see you. Are you okay with me recording today?
Oh, sure.
Okay, thank you. And which would you prefer? Would you like questions to happen as we go, or would you like for me to watch the chat and hold them for a later time?
Watch the chat, I think, would be the best, at least during the first half hour. And then after that, if there are others, we may break and do some stuff with that then.
Okay. All right, great.
Let's see, I make sure I'm in my right camera.
I'm going to make you co-host so that you can share your screen.
All right.
And I'm not sure, Jesse, do you know about how many people responded?
Yeah, we had 94 register.
So it could be a good group, a big group.
Wow. Yeah. As you know, I was here last week and watched that. That was very good. I wish I could come back next week and see the second half of that. That was very interesting, very well done. I'm glad to have been here for it.
Thank you. Well, you're welcome anytime.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
All right, so we'll just start up as soon as we are able. I'm gonna hold off right till noon or a couple minutes past.
Okay.
I noticed that you have a degree, D.Min.
Doctor of Ministry.
Yeah, my son has the same degree. He's in Rochester.
Oh.
Have you heard of Bruce Buller?
Not off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. He was at Homestead United Methodist Church and then retired. And anyway, he's there at the Homestead in Northeast. That would be Northeast Rochester.
The Living Center.
Yeah, he's in the apartments.
Right. That's Northwest.
Is that North?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's half a mile up the road from where I live. So
okay.
I live over in that neighborhood. So. Yeah, we've been here. What is it now? Since 2000. How quickly we forget. 2007.
Okay. Yeah, I can't even remember when Dad moved to Rochester. He and Mom moved there. Were assigned to that church probably in 1990.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe 88. I seem to remember they had to drive up when my daughter was born. So that's how I.
Well, my wife's a pastor, retired pastor also. She was in a church over near St. Charles.
Okay. Yeah, well, Dad's still subbing for people and keeping busy.
Good for him. I'm doing this instead.
Good for you.
I became a writer, a full-time writer last year when I had because of COVID, Mayo was getting rid of people, and I was a supplemental by that time. And so I retired instead and pivoted over to writing and doing workshops, things like that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for those of you who have been putting in your name and email and organization into the chat. That sure helps Jesse with attendance. And we will be getting started in just a few minutes. We're expecting a possibly very large group. So we're going to give everyone about 5 minutes to get signed on. And then we'll get going. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's almost afternoon, and I welcome you here. If you didn't hear me before, please type in your name, your organization, and your email into the chat. That's very helpful for us for follow-up information and taking attendance. We are going to start in about 2 minutes. We're going to just give a couple more minutes for people to log on. We had quite a bit of response and are expecting a large group. And so glad you could join us today. We'll proceed in just a couple minutes. All right, well, we are at 12:01. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. There will be people joining us as we continue, but that's okay. I'm so glad you're all here, and we will be taking questions. I talked with our speaker, Barry Lehman, and it would be best if you could type your questions as they arise in the chat. I will help watch that chat, and then he'll break for questions. It'll just be easier given the material. I'll have a few announcements just before we leave, but at this point, I want to turn things over to Barry Lehman, who is a retired LADC working at Mayo and also a doctorate of ministry, and let him tell you a little bit more about himself and our topic today. So thank you so much for being here. And Barry, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here this afternoon. As you hear and can see, I'm Barry Lehman. Here's a little bit about me, and I didn't catch some of the capitalizations there. I'm sorry. Oh well, we're all learning. Who I am? Well, let me go back to that. I'm an LADC. I'm retired. I retired last year. Due to COVID mainly. I'm also a retired pastor with a doctorate of ministry and counseling. I've been a member of the March Ethics Committee for quite a few years now, former chair, and I helped author the Ethical Decisions Manual. My interests include long-term recovery, the disease model of addiction, how it works and what its ethical implications are, gender-related issues, and racial justice issues. How I got interested in long-term recovery, well, first of all, I am a person in long-term recovery since October 1988 and have been working in the field since 1993. Over the past 5 to 7, 8 years, as I was doing some other things, I learned a bunch about mastery and about practice and about discipline. And I look back and realized that that's how I managed to stay sober myself. And working in the field, I saw how it helped others. So that's where I got to this idea about mastery. And we're going to talk more about that. I do talk fast because I, as always, I have more information to give than I have time, probably. Today's objectives. The first 2 objectives here are in the first half hour, the first half of the presentation. The first will be to review how primary treatment builds the foundation for long-term recovery. I don't think you're going to find anything new in this section, especially since I would assume most of us who are here today have worked in primary treatment. There isn't a lot that goes on beyond primary treatment or in that first 6 months. Many places do have the 6-month step downs, but beyond that, it's pretty difficult to get a lot of people into such long-term treatment. So most of us have had plenty of experience with primary treatment. I'm reviewing that as the entryway into what I'm going to talk about with long-term recovery. Then in the second part of this first half, I'm going to talk about the different aspects of long-term recovery. What does it mean? What is mastery? What are the elements of it? How can we in primary treatment help develop that, which is what the third section will be. I've been working on a book, which is, I got back just 2 days ago from the first edit. The book will be out in June. It's on mastering recovery. I'm excited by it, and I'm getting a lot of very positive comments back because, as we all know, there's not a lot written about long-term recovery. There's a lot out there on primary treatment. Some of us may remember Ernie Larson and his book, Second Stage, I don't get it right yet, Stage 2 Recovery, which I had forgotten all about. It's been such a long time since that book was out. But I'm going to be working with that over the next month or so and figure out how that applies and add it to it. What are my underlying assumptions? Well, again, I'm sure none of this will come as a surprise. First is that sobriety is more than abstaining. We say that all the time. We know that. We tell our clients and our patients about it. But recovery is more than just being sober. The old line of putting the plug in the jug is real. It's more than that. It has to be, because it leads, as we do it, to a sense of self. And that's going to be important to long-term recovery, who we are. Well, that returns as abstinence moves from, as abstinence becomes sobriety, begins to expand. First couple weeks when they're not using, not drinking, not smoking, there's a lot of white knuckling going on. At that, as it moves on and things settle down, all those early withdrawal and post-acute withdrawal symptoms begin to settle a little bit, sobriety begins to grow. And that has a different feel to it. That has a wider aspect to it. And as that happens, there's a sense of purpose that can grow in an individual. Recovery becomes reality. And recovery is the whole picture. I'll say it again, I say it all the time. Patients and clients of mine get tired of it. We practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, that's recovery. When we've discovered how to be more than just not users, we move into recovery. Long-term recovery, and I use the level of about 2 years as the breaking point based on some stuff from Terry Gorski, which I'll get to in a minute. But long-term recovery is built, I believe, on 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. This comes from the ideas of people like Daniel Pink in a book called Drive on motivation. Long-term recovery requires motivation, and motivation requires autonomy, mastery, purpose. We'll get to that. But first, the basics. I'm a trumpet player. I've been a trumpet player since 8th grade. Way back, I picked up the trumpet before Herb Alpert had his first hit. And people are saying, Herb who? In any case, I had a chance to meet Herb Alpert and my other idol, Doc Severinsen, a few years ago. I asked them what they do to warm up and how they practice, and they always start with the basics. Doc is 93 years old, Herb is 83 now, and they still practice every day, and they still start with the basics. So that's where we're going to start. Again, nothing new in any of this. The foundation of our treatment programs, most of them today, are based on the science of the disease of addiction. Or as we call it today, substance use disorder. I still trip over the words. I still trip over wanting to say addict or alcoholic. And so if I do say those things, please excuse me. I've been around then long enough not to easily learn new tricks. But the idea that it's a disease is significant. It's huge. And I don't think we've really explored how broad that is, especially for long-term recovery. It is a chronic relapsing disease. What does that mean? It goes on and it relapses. It happens. The relapse means the disease comes back. That's usually seen when the symptoms recur. That also is important for long-term recovery because we know what the symptoms are. And if we can help our individual patients and clients remember what those symptoms are, they can begin to see them when they happen. I think it's also important in looking at this as a relapsing disease to say that it is the disease that relapses, not the person. Let me say that again. It is the disease that relapses, not the person. That takes a huge mental shift for most of us. Well, what caused your relapse? The answer is simple. My disease relapsed. The symptoms came back. Why? What weren't you doing? We tend to blame it most, and we all have a responsibility, and that's the maintenance part. But right from the start, we need, I think, to get our clients and patients looking at this as a relapsing disease, no different from cancer or from MS or from diabetes. What started me on this journey of the disease aspect was reading the book, The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a book about 12 years ago now on cancer. And he started using the phrase that the cancer relapsed. And I went, oh, You mean we're not just talking about alcohol and drug use anymore? Important shift in my thinking. That's where I think we need to go. We know that it is a neurochemical, genetic, and epigenetic disease. We know about the chemistry of the brain now in ways that we never did before. We know that everything that goes on in our brain, which by default then means everything we do, think, and say, is neurochemical. It's the chemicals that send the messages from one place to another. Sometimes those chemicals get overloaded or underloaded, as the case may be. Sometimes it's caused by genetics. Are we predisposed to the disease of a substance use disorder? Some people are predisposed. It's in the genetics. A long way from figuring this out. We're probably where cancer research was back in the 60s or early 70s. We are not very far along on this. Probably some places they are beginning to see answers, but those haven't been written up yet. The other piece is the epigenetic. And I was here last week for the Adverse Childhood Experience workshop, which is going to have the second half next week. Very good and an important piece that we have not spent much time dealing with, other than how do we heal our traumas. But the epigenetics of that we pass on certain kind of traits that are not genetic in and of themselves, but they are caused by the brain being hijacked. The brain is plastic. The neuroplasticity of the brain is what causes some of this. It also gives us the future hope that we can get better. Awareness and understanding of all this is how we build it. Abstinence, I think, is essential. I'm one of those who believes that abstinence is essential. If you truly have a moderate to severe substance use disorder, you got to stay away from the chemicals because they're what hijack the brain. Beyond that, the basic principles we'll see, I believe, in 12 steps: mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical, smart recovery, celebrate recovery. They all are based on the same principles, beginning to end. I see no difference in any of them. It's simply in how they're worded. We know what the basic symptoms are: impaired control, social impairment, risky use, drug effects. Those 11 symptoms that are in the DSM-5, those are important to remember, to learn them and remember. What's recovery? Recovery is a process of change. That's why we work with things like the stages of change or use motivational interviewing. We know how people can be taught and learn to change. It's their individual lives. We can't do it for them. Nobody can do it for them. It's on them to learn this, and we work with them to do that. Why? So they can improve first their health and wellness. Any of us who work in primary know that the first week to 10 days for most people is getting their health settled. We continue to watch that to make sure something isn't going to happen. At the same time, we build the idea of wellness. It's more than just health. It's also an approach called wellness. That's called a holistic approach. What are they going to do? Build a self-directed life. They're going to learn how to live that over the first 2 years. That's what recovery begins with, in order that they can reach their full potential, whatever that may be. Also part of the definition, there it is again, to be able to make healthy, informed choices. Patient autonomy. We talk about it in ethics. We talk about it in all of healthcare. Make that informed, healthy choice. We help them learn how to do that. Have a stable and safe place to live. Discover purpose, meaningful daily activities. If the job may not be giving them that, we help them discover perhaps ways, or they work to discover ways that they can become more creative and use the resources that are there, even if they have to stay in a job that they don't care for. Find that other way. And part of that is through community, building relationships and social networks that provide support. This is recovery. Back a long time ago now, in the 1980s, Terry Gorski, who was one of the pioneers in relapse prevention, came up with what he called the developmental tasks of recovery. I had the great joy of working with Terry, learning with Terry for a week a few years ago, uh, 10 years ago. He died last year, a great loss. Um, although he didn't do a lot of writing after those first few years, but what he wrote was I think, paradigm shifting. Here are the developmental tasks. The first two are what happened in the first couple of weeks of a residential program. Early recovery begins then, and that lasts up to about 6 months. Middle recovery goes from 6 to about 18 months. Late recovery begins to overlap in there. And finally, maintenance. Learning how to enjoy the journey, learning how to maintain your health and wellness with a chronic relapsing disease. Just like a person with diabetes has to learn how to do that, so does a person with MS, which is another such disease. How do we do that? We also learn that in the maintenance, you can't go back to some of the things you used to do. Sad story of ABC News reporter Peter Jennings. He quit smoking years and years until 9/11 happened. He was covering it in New York. He lived in New York. He went back to smoking and and died within several years. Is there a connection there? I think there is. I think there is. So looking beyond the beginning, beyond those first 2 years, I had a friend back in my early recovery who, when asked how long it takes to get this, he said, "Oh, Pete, you'll get the recovery you deserve at about 10 years." I went, "Oh," as did everybody else. And his answer to that was, "Just keep going, just keep doing it. You'll see what I mean. You ain't seen nothing yet." So I picked up the "you ain't seen nothing yet," and that's true. I believe that. At 30 some years, I ain't seen nothing yet. There's more ahead of me here. It continues to work because of long-term recovery, building it. It takes motivation to do that. Now, basic human nature has one very basic foundational motivational strategy. It's called survival. It was built into us from the day one, living out there on the savannah or wherever else they lived, and the lion comes chasing you. You're going to run. You're going to move very quickly. Then it became Motivation 2.0. And this is from Daniel Pink's book. And that's the old carrot and stick approach, extrinsic. It's external. You're rewarded for it. Now the survival is very basic. That's in the reptilian, the lizard brain back there. For example, if you see a truck coming down the street and it begins to swerve to hit you, you're going to respond to that truck coming at you before your conscious mind knows it. Now, it's such a short period, you don't know there's a difference between the two, but you're going to jump 0.2 of a second before your conscious brain realizes that there's a truck coming at you. That may be just enough time to live. That's why it's the survival mechanism. The extrinsic is the carrot and stick. If you do this, you'll get rewarded. It's all the outside. If you go to treatment, I'll stay with you. If you go to treatment, you'll keep your job. That's the extrinsic value. If you go to treatment, you'll feel better. You won't have these problems. Go to treatment, stay sober. That's the extrinsic. Long-term recovery requires a third type of motivation that Pink and others talk about. He says in both of these instances of survival and extrinsic, they work very well until they don't, which takes us to the third motivation, which is intrinsic. It's going on inside of us. It's like saying recovery is good in and of itself, period. It's good to be in recovery, period, which is the motivation to stay sober. And it includes all these kind of words of being able to take assessment, take responsibility, autonomy, you're a learner, all those things become real in this kind of motivation. So what is all this motivation stuff? And here's where we get into those three things. And these Pink talks a lot about them, but it's also from Anders Ericsson. Anders Ericsson is the guy who originally did the research that came up with what Malcolm Gladwell called the 10,000 hour rule, that it takes 10,000 hours to be good at something. And it's not about skill, it's about building skill. It's not about being born with the ability to be a Mozart, which he had unique abilities. But Mozart, as a child, practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. He built those. He was motivated to build those. And if he hadn't done that, he would not have been Mozart. He would not have had the fame that he got as well. Gladwell and others talk about people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, who had unique experiences that other people could not have at that time. They were able to work and play with computers for 10,000 hours and figured them out. That's the idea behind this motivational issue. 10,000 hours. Just keep with that thought. So what is motivation? It starts with autonomy. I can make my decisions. Now, when a person walks into treatment, it's pretty difficult for them to make healthy decisions. We all talk about that. We know all about it. We understand what it means, that they're powerless, their life has become manageable, their brain has been hijacked, all the connections aren't working right. How do we teach them that? That's all kinds of different ways that we do that. But autonomy means a person is self-directed, back to patient autonomy, that the patient has to be there and be part of the process of determining what their treatment plan is. What the autonomy does is allows us to increase our skills. That's the opportunity to say, I can do something. And as our skill increases, we feel better about ourselves. We have a better understanding of who we are and what we can do, as well as what we're willing or not willing to do. And that's where the healthy, unhealthy can show up. As things get better, we begin to build confidence. And then we discover that we can do things that we didn't know we could do before. We are empowered. In spite of all the talk about powerlessness, and it is essential to talk about powerlessness in early recovery and probably throughout long-term recovery as well. But if you go to the big book, you'll already see, even before Bill talks about the steps, he's talking about being empowered. He doesn't use that word that way, but he talks about finding a new power, getting a new power. We are not just sitting there victims of our powerlessness. Bill is very clear about that. You are empowered, you get power, and that's in the steps, step 2 and 3. When you begin to discover there's a power greater than yourself that can help restore you to sanity, you can begin to decide that that power can be given to you to use, and that power will work with you. And that's the empowering part. What is mastery? Well, mastery is a mindset that is based on motivation. Mastery is getting better at something that matters. Do not misread me. Mastery does not mean I have mastered recovery. It does not mean I am now the master of my own life, let alone the universe. That was before. I was the master of the universe before I got sober. We all know how that works out. Getting better at something that matters is learning how to do it better. It's an ongoing thing. It's Doc Severinsen at 93, after 70 years, 80 years of playing trumpet, still playing the basics. Motivation, it could be external, we talked about that, or internal. That recovery is good in and of itself. There's fixed mindset and growth mindset. The fixed mindset says, oops, I have a disease. I'm lost. That's one place to get after you do step 1. If I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable, the heck with it. Screw it. I'm gone. I'm going to keep using till I die because it's going to happen anyway. I can't do anything about it. That's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset says, I have a disease, but I can learn to cope with it. I can learn to manage it. I can learn to do something with it. I do have a future. Now, unfortunately, mastery is not something easy. It's a pain in the neck. If I were told that I'm going to have to work on my character defects for the rest of my life, that I'm going to have to deal with my shortcomings, I would have said, maybe. That's not easy. We know it. It's exhausting. We all know people who are in treatment, primary treatment, who say, I'm more tired at the end of a day of treatment doing nothing but thinking. Yeah, right. Than I am after a full day of work. And that's true, because your brain is the single biggest utilizer daily of energy. It's exhausting. You have to develop a passion and a patience for long-term growth. You're going to feel like giving up. You're going to see blockades instead of obstacles. You're going to come to that wall and you're going to, well, can't go anywhere. I'll turn around and go back the other direction instead of going over or under or around. We've all heard, how do you know what God's will is? Hit the wall and turn right, or do the next right thing. I had a friend in the ministry many years ago who said, you walk through the door that's in front of you and look around and you go, oh, that was God's will. You may not know it as it's happening, but you will know it when you get to the other side. Just do the next right thing. That's not easy. It's a pain. Mastery is also not a destination. That's why you can't say, I'm the master of recovery or whatever. When people feel better, they quit. I'm doing well. I don't need any of this anymore. I don't need to continue after people say this after the second week in treatment, but many times, but going on beyond that, after their time in primary, I don't need to step down. I got it all figured out. It's just great. Now, it may be that they can't continue in an ongoing program like we offer at our treatment centers, but fortunately, there are lots of places out there that can help them, like AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, Smart Recovery, take your pick. There's a lot out there. You can't say I've arrived, not with a chronic disease. I strongly believe that even after 5 years of, say, cancer remission, it can be dangerous to begin to think that you're cured because it's in remission. I think that's important to remember. I don't disagree with calling it cured with cancer. I think that's an important piece of the growth of dealing with it. But if to be aware is important. I had a friend who's a long time ago, whose mother was at that time called manic depression, bipolar. When she was depressed, she'd go to the doctor. They'd put her on the appropriate medications for the time. She'd begin to get better. She'd quit taking the medication. The next thing that would happen is she'd be out buying. She'd be on a manic phase and she would get into significant financial difficulties. And because of that, she would get depressed. So it became that cycle. She felt better and quit. Mastery is something that we get closer and closer to. And that's where the mindset of growth happens. AA calls it progress, not perfection. No matter how close you think you are, you're still not there. So what are the steps that get us closer to mastery? The first one, and I learned this from back about six years ago. I've been playing trumpet, as I said, since 8th grade. I went to a trumpet workshop I went to a big band camp and then a trumpet workshop. And I was hit up the side of the head with a 2x4. It was just incredible. I learned things that I never knew in 50 years of playing trumpet. And one of them was deliberate practice. This again goes to Anders Ericsson and his work. Deliberate practice. It's designed to increase performance and move you out of your comfort zone. You don't become comfortable. Where do I got to go next? How can I grow? How can I get better? It has to be deliberate. You have to have some goals. You have to have some direction. You have to be willing to reach higher, not just practice what you already know. If you practice what you already know, and I'm going to say this again in a few minutes, you're only going to get better at what you're doing wrong. because you don't know what you're doing wrong. You're just going to keep going, and you're going to repeat and make the same mistakes over and over again. 10,000 hours is great, said Gladwell and Erickson, but if it's 10,000 hours of doing it wrong, you're going to get really good at doing it wrong. Very important piece. And that means repeat, repeat, repeat. Pablo Casals is another one who in his 90s, the cellist, he was asked, why does he still practice every day? He says, well, I think I'm beginning to understand it now. Michael Jordan, any of the great basketball players, they didn't just stand there and said, oh, I'm going to do a few free throws and do them. They would do 500, 1,000. They would keep at it until it became muscle memory, until it became natural. That's what mastery is becoming natural at recovery. You build on the basics and you use them to grow. In AA, people have always said, if you're having trouble with a step, do the one before. Now, most of the time, most people, if they're really serious about it, will end up back at step one. As they go back, even if they're at step 9 and they're having troubles, it's going to go back to step 1. We all know that. Most of us aren't willing to admit that to ourselves, but that's where it's going to go. The very basics, 1, 2, 3. That waltz of recovery, steps 1, 2, 3. That's what kept many of us sober in those early days. But essential to that is constant critical feedback. Back to if you don't know what you're doing wrong, you won't improve. That information comes from someone who's been there and who has already done it. Now, I went to trumpet experts, people who taught this and have been teaching it for 40 years. Go to somebody who's already done it. Call them a sponsor. Call them a mentor. Call them a coach. Call them a best friend. Go to people who've already done it. How do they do it? And listen. That's essential to the mastery. My trumpet teacher said, you know, you're not doing this right. Oh, yeah, I am. No, you're not, Barry. Come on. Pay attention. Listen to it. I don't hear it. Listen better. Challenge. Challenge. Focus ruthlessly on where you need help. Take the advice and work with it. Those who get better at what they do focus on their weakness and look for their blind spots. And as I've already said, prepare for this process to be mentally and physically exhausting. You're retraining the brain. You're rebalancing the chemistry. And the first time your brain comes up against something new or even something old that it used to know how to do in this crazy substance use disorder way, it's going to go back to that unless we keep working, and it's going to take effort. These are the kind of things that we need to be aware of in early recovery and know that 2 years isn't a magical mystery time. And as much as I hate to admit it, neither's 30-some. I had one of those instances a couple weeks ago, probably COVID tiredness or whatever. I had some of the old behaviors, because that's the first thing that the relapse is going to have me show. The disease is going to re-show those symptoms. And those are always, at this point, the ones that say, I can behave a little differently. And my brain went and was acting and reacting like it did many years ago. Until my wife and I were talking and she says, wow, do you feel like drinking? I went, no, but. And the but was the awareness that this was a disease at work. It's always there. That's part of why we learn the basics and why that's so essential to what we do as working with people in treatment programs, primary treatment. What are the signs and symptoms of mastery? Well, I always love happy, joyous, and free. That's a great place to start. That's why I'm calling my book Finding a New Freedom and a New Happiness Through Long-Term Sobriety. Mastering Recovery is the title. Finding a new freedom and a new happiness through long-term sobriety. You continue to do it. even when it isn't fun anymore. And fun is usually defined as giving me a high in early recovery. Hey, this is great. But you sit there at the meeting and you go, if I hear him talk one more time about his early recovery 20 years ago, I'm going to scream. Yeah, that was me. Hearing about that. And he was great. I could tell you his whole story with the tornado all the way. And I've heard this story 25 years ago. It's still there because I remembered it. And all of a sudden it becomes part of my story and my awareness. So I pay attention. Acceptance, the answer to all my problems. We know that, 417. Have a sense of purpose. You know what you're doing. It may not be a whole new job. It may not be a whole new way of living your life, but you have a sense of purpose. Essential, avoiding resentments and self-pity. When you hear yourself feeling sorry for yourself, when you hear yourself fantasizing, oh, if only I could, oh, it would be so much better if I wasn't locked down at home in COVID. Take your pick. Practice these principles in all our affairs. And then the promises coming true are the best, I think, symptom of mastery happening. Bill W. called this emotional sobriety way back in 1958. In a letter to a friend that was later published in the Grapevine, these are some of his quotes from there. And I thought, is emotional sobriety a side benefit of recovery, or is it truly the greater goal? I think in 1958, Bill was ready to say it may be the greater goal. It starts out as a side benefit, but it's something that really is where we're going with this. Without emotional sobriety, you still got those early symptoms. You got still the first symptoms of this disease, and it's not healthy. I think recovery is a double journey. In the book, I refer to these as the paradoxes. They're the both and. They require abstinence, not using. That's a non-action. I'm not using. I'm sitting here holding my hands. I'm white knuckling it. Or action, something I do. It's an inward process and an outward process. It's living in balance is the way I describe it. We are powerless. I'm still powerless over those chemicals, but I've been empowered. It's personal. And we'll talk about a couple of these in a minute. And it's a community. I have to do the work, but I can't do it alone. It's work and it's play. It's slow, thinking about things, and it's learning how to intuitively be in recovery. It's both structured and improvised. It's an art, and it's that basic science that we don't want to forget. It is spiritual, and it is concrete, things that we can do. Living in that balance. For example, personal and community. Personal is the inward. That's the work of internalizing the message. It's the self-care. It's taking responsibility for myself. The community, that's the outward. That's where I live the message, but that's also where I find the support I need so I can give it back to others. Can't do it alone. Helen Keller, alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. Structured and improvised. I'm a jazz trumpet player. Improvisation, and it blew my mind the first time I realized that most jazz solos that you hear on records or CDs or wherever are not written down. They're making them up as they go. That's improvisation, but it's built on a structure. It's built on a framework. Our framework is recovery. It's the discipline. It's the focus. It gives us orderliness and stability. It's the foundation for change. But life changes. I am no longer 40 years old like I was when I started this journey. I have to apply what I learned then to life today. If for no other reason than COVID didn't exist in 1988. I have to apply my experiences to life. I have to develop problem solving skills. That takes mindfulness. That goes beyond just mindless repetition. I can't just do the scales and think, okay, I've done them. That isn't what Doc does. He listens. He's mindful. He's listening for new ideas, on a new day with new paths. I'm going to ask if there have been any questions so far or any comments before I move on to taking these into long-term recovery.
Yeah, there was, a number of comments saying, this is good information. It's helpful. I want the slides, so everyone will get them.
Good.
Christine had a question about where does harm reduction fit into what you've been sharing?
Great question. And thank you for asking that. I have not yet added that to the book, but I think it's important. Harm reduction, I think, is a part of the process moving toward motivation to stay sober. It's in that early recovery. It may be. And harm reduction, by harm reduction, I'm assuming you mean instances like continuing to use under certain kind of circumstances. Some people put medication-assisted treatment under harm reduction. I don't necessarily. The Suboxone and those kind of medications are not, in my opinion, harm reduction. They are a process of recovery. And that has to do with the understanding of the concept of the disease. It is a disease. Medication-assisted treatment is essential. Back when I started in recovery, giving somebody Prozac was considered harm reduction by some. I was told you can't take Prozac and be sober, or you can't take any of those particular kind of tranquilizers, antidepressants, and Prozac. Actually, Prozac didn't exist when I got sober. Well, I'll tell you something. And so I suffered in some ways for a few years with depression as a result of that. There were very few good antidepressants that they could give at that point. Medication-assisted treatment is not harm reduction. Harm reduction is giving people needles, in my book. And again, I'm not sure that's necessarily bad. With a person with the chronic part of the disease, it may be all that gets them through the day and keeps them alive. Has to be well cared for. Contingency management's another piece that can be a little bit controversial. That's the carrot and stick approach. I understand that. I know where it comes from. I think it's useful in the right ways. If it keeps them alive, keeps them from overdosing or whatever else, it's important.
Yeah. We have a comment here from Mike Davis that says, this is one of the best adaptations of the 12 steps into today's idea of recovery from addiction. Thank you. And
you're welcome.
A reminder from Gregory that in some 12-step groups, MAT or medication-assisted therapies are considered still using. So it's, there's many opinions as it seems as there are people in recovery.
That's true. Back when I first got sober, and this was not locally here, this was in Wisconsin. There were 3 or 4 people who we called the AA Mafia. I don't think they had a home group other than the 3 or 4 of them. And they would show up at all the AA meetings around the area once a month. They'd kind of roam around the area. And they'd come in, and sometime 20 minutes in or in the discussion, they would start challenging all of us on everything we were doing because we weren't doing like they did it. They were even contradicting Bill while quoting Bill. They would say, you don't go to a doctor, you don't go to a psychiatrist, they don't know what they're doing. And Bill clearly says, go to the psychiatrist. He says, go to the doctor. It's in the big book, folks. That's been, I had this one scared me. I had a friend who was not needing to be in recovery. One of my other friends in recovery told him that he should stop taking his schizophrenia medication. All he needed to do was do the 12 steps and they would work. Fortunately, my friend with schizophrenia called me and said, Barry, you're in recovery. Is this right? I said, no, don't stop. You're better. And I got a call from this guy with schizophrenia 2 years ago. This is 25 years later. He's doing great. He's doing great. His schizophrenia has not relapsed. It's under control. He manages it. He would have been dead long ago without it. And that kind of thinking on the part of some people in AA is less helpful.
Great. I think that's it for now, unless someone wants to
Okay.
unmute, but we've got about a little less, well, 10 minutes left. So
Okay. Well, let me give you the basics of merge. And what I'm going to do in this next section is challenge you to think about this. When you get the PowerPoint, look over that stuff on long-term recovery. I'd like to say buy my book when it comes out, and I'll go in more in depth, but that's not fair to use this for that. Sorry about that. Anyway, practice these principles. We've all seen the principles. This is part of what we in early recovery begin to teach people. This is what we begin to do in early. How do we do it? That's where each of you has to figure out how you do it. I'm going to do it differently than you do. We're different people. We have different experiences. Each one of your patients is going to be different. Some may be great at the acceptance level, but not at the hope. Some may say, yeah, I got the disease, but I'm afraid to try it. They need courage. That's where you working with them helps them. These principles, and if you go Google it, Google search online for the principles of the 12 steps, you'll get most of them many of them are in agreement, but there's some tweaks and little differences. I put them all together and made this list of 12. Acceptance is the first step. Starting with that, you got to give them hope. Everybody in here knows this. I'm not saying you don't. I'm not giving you anything new. What I'm trying to suggest is that we need to put this in terms of long-term recovery and not just what's thinking right at the moment. And as we begin to work on these, and you'll have a worksheet that you can use to play with this. Step 4 is courage. It takes a lot to make that personal inventory. Then the honesty or integrity of reaching out and saying, I want to talk to you about it. I want to admit these things. Step 6, the willingness and patience. Became entirely ready. Then the humility of actually asking for the power to become sober. Then 8 and 9, love is the heart of it, because now, up until this point, everybody in recovery doing these steps has been working with people in recovery. Obviously, people, you're out and work and so on, but the major interactions of recovery are happening internally and within the community of AA or recovering people. Now you begin to think about those people beyond that group. And finally, at step 9, you take the responsibility of saying, oops, I was wrong. I need your forgiveness. I'm making my amends. Then you're into the maintenance, the discipline. I think step 10 and 11 are the heart of the program of long-term recovery. Discipline is understanding what I need to do on a daily basis to strengthen my recovery for tomorrow. You'll hear me say that a little bit later. And then there's the awareness, improving conscious contact with whatever my higher power is. And some of that's internal. That's mindfulness. That's learning what's going on around me and what I can do and how I can build on my autonomy, how I can build on my skills and my experiences, and then reaching out with a sense of service, purpose, in order that I can practice these principles in all my affairs, using the tools of recovery. Now, here's the traditional list that most of us learn in AA or NA: abstinence, meeting, sponsor, telephone, literature, service. Well, doing, again, some Googling, I came up with a list of tools, combining some and looking at what long-term recovery means. Abstinence and acceptance, I think, in all that we do. Recognizing MAT and harm reduction as maybe part of that movement. I'm not setting those aside. A goal is abstinence, and abstinence may be not using the way you used to, or it may be Suboxone, or take your pick. I think that's an important part of recovery. There's the community. That's essential in even in harm reduction. A community, a support network, whether that means meeting, sponsor, mentor, phone. I'm jealous of people today who can pick up their phone and call their sponsor at the drop of a hat. I had to find a landline. If I'm driving home and I'm having a craving, I couldn't pick up the phone and call my sponsor. I had to wait till I got home because we didn't have cell phones, and and I didn't have a cell phone until 1999 or something like that. Coping skills. Learn how to cope. That's part of our process. That's part of what we start teaching, helping people find goals. These are the tools. You all know what these are. I've expanded learning beyond literature to, of course, we used to have the cassette tapes that we passed around with people's talks. There's a gazillion of those talks online. It's wonderful. All the ones and many, 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 many more that I've heard. They're a great way to learn. Those are online talks. Therapy. Go to therapy. If I found out tomorrow I was in need of some more counseling or therapy, I'd go. That's part of the learning process. Meditation, mindfulness, taking that personal inventory, taking care of yourself. On the worksheet I'm going to give you, which you will have, looks something like this. I don't know how that shows up on camera. What I did on this worksheet is take the section of Gorski's transition, all 6 of them. This one is the one on early recovery. This is the 3rd transition in Gorski's list. And I put the items that are worked on over on the left side. The next column over talks about my quick down and dirty understanding of what that means in early recovery toward long-term recovery. The basic understanding, and it's a little clearer on this sheet. I call it application to long-term recovery. These I filled in, and it's up to you to change them if you want. I mean, I just threw these as thoughts. And then what are the principles and what are the tools? With that, the principle of honesty. That means a tool for that is inventory. The principle of acceptance is learning. It may be learning more about the disease. It may be learning more about yourself. The principle of hope. I can learn to cope. I can take care of myself. Courage, back to the inventory, is a tool. The willingness. That's where your sober network and service. This is a working tool for you. Now, what I did on the one that's the worksheet, for the first 3, I filled it all in across there like that. Then in number 4, which is middle recovery, I just filled in the first 2 columns, and you can fill in the principles and tools as you see fit. And then on the last 2 sections, which is late recovery and maintenance, I left everything but the first blank area blank. Take it, play with it, use it as a way of discovering for yourself. Sit down with a couple other counselors or people in your agency. Say, what can we do about this? Wow. Yeah, I know we don't want to talk a lot about late recovery here, but how can we help our clients or our patients discover this part of long-term recovery? Right here, how can we set the stage? So to put it back together, there they are, Mastery Revisited, 10,000 hours of practice. Now, to circle around, 10,000 hours, if you look at your job of an 8-hour day and you work and you say, I'm working 8 hours a day at my job, to be good at that, it's going to take about 3.5 years. That's 10,000 hours. When I started working at Mayo, they said, you won't feel comfortable here until you're here a year. And I thought, oh, you're crazy. Of course I will. They were right. And simply because it takes that long to get used to whatever's going on around you. 10,000 hours of full-time practice takes 3.5 years, considering it a job. The way we work recovery, because we have jobs and we have other things, the actual actions of learning how to internalize it aren't going to happen that quickly. It did not, it should not have surprised me, though it did, that 10,000 hours takes about 10 years. My friend was right. What can I do today to strengthen my recovery for tomorrow? These are my books and information I've used. Remember that the basics are still the basics. How you do anything is how you do everything, which is why we practice these principles in all of our affairs. Love it. We have found much of heaven and have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. Buzz Lightyear to infinity and beyond.
Thank you so much, Barry. I think
Oh,
we
and
have- Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we have
I was going to say, let me put in the chat here.
one or two questions. We've got like 3 minutes left. Does anyone have a quick?
Okay.
I'm seeing thank yous.
You're welcome. And I have spent most of the last 33 years trying to figure out what these all mean. And I see a raised hand, Faria.
Yep, Faria, go ahead.
Hi, Hi, Barry. Yes. Hi, Barry.
Hi.
Thank you so
Hi,
much
how
for
are-
presenting.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yes.
I wanted to know, can this be adapted to fit other religious culture, religious communities of that, I wanted to kind of see ways that I can adapt this to fit the Muslim population in South Minneapolis.
I think that would be fantastic. I'm a strong, when I worked, part of the book, one chapter of the book is going to be about religious institutions. Unfortunately, all I know are Christian and Jewish groups generally, because that's my background. Let me say, Faria, that if you want to get in touch with me, I'd love to work on that. I think that's essential. I found a couple of websites that talk about building recovery in the Muslim population, and I think that's a huge need. We have ways of needing even to develop this into the African American community in general, the Black community overall, because, for example, we have only 3 to 4% of LADCs in Minnesota are consider themselves Black or African American. Very small number, very small number. So yeah, definitely get in touch with me. I will put I put already my website for Mastery, and there you can get other resources as I develop them. But I'm going to put my email address in here as well. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, please feel free to do so.
Well, I am just delighted. We have nothing but very positive, thank you, grateful comments.
Please be careful. I'm a recovering person. That means I have an ego problem. But anyway, thank you.
Oh, well, we're very fortunate to have you with us. And I'm going to wrap things up here. We're right at 1 o'clock. Our next echo in this series will be on the 6th of May, and it's looking at the intersection of substance use disorder and eating disorders. We have a wonderful Indigenous Women Wellness Echo coming up on the 27th of April, looking at healing and medicinal plants. And we'll go for a walk with Hope Flanagan and talk about some Native American traditions that we can all access very easily. And finally, tomorrow we have our Friday Forum, which is the in-depth look at perinatal mood disorders. We had an echo on that recently, and this is going to be a little deeper dive. We've got 2 hours together. If you want any information of any of this, you guys have our emails. You know, both Jesse and I, you see us all the time on echoes and in your inbox. So please let us know if you need more information. Thank you so much, Barry. And
You're welcome. Thank you for all that you do there. Great work.
well, thank you. And thanks for everyone who came today. We hope to see you again soon and have a wonderful day. I think the sun is actually out, which is miraculous in and of itself. I'm excited. I'm going to go breathe some fresh air. So good day, everyone. Thank you.
Do you need anything else from me?
No, Barry, but I'm going to ask
Okay.
him again. We'd love
Okay.
you back.
Thanks. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
I'm going to go ahead and end this. Jesse and Sherry, I haven't seen you, but you can hear me, I think. I'm going to close out the meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
You're okay with attendance? Because I
Let
can
me
wait.
get the
for
chat
that
line.
entry.
Mm. Okay, I'm good now.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.